The ship stopped screaming 3 hours ago, and that's when I knew we were already gone. I don't mean the alarms. Those had been wailing for days, cycling through every emergency protocol until they looped back to the beginning like a broken music box. I mean the ship itself. The Atropos. 47 decks, crew of 900, hauling a mining platform the size of a city block toward the Kepler Belt. She used to hum. A low, constant vibration you felt more than heard, the kind that gets into your bones after a few months in deep space until you can't sleep without it. 3 hours ago, she went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like the difference between closing your eyes and going blind. I was in the habitation ring when it happened, staring at a cup of coffee I'd been trying to convince myself was normal. The dispenser had been giving me the same cup for 6 days. Same temperature. Same fill level. Same faint metallic aftertaste that wasn't in the flavor profile. I'd reported it 4 times. Engineering never responded. When the humming stopped, I watched the liquid inside go perfectly still. No vibration. No microgravity ripple. Nothing. I set it down and it didn't move. Not even a millimeter. Like it had been painted onto the table. Yates came through on the comm. His voice sounded flat. Wrong. All personnel to emergency assembly. Deck 12. Immediately. He didn't say why. Yates always said why. He'd been first officer for 11 years, ran the Atropos like a summer camp, always over-explaining. This time, nothing. Just those 2 words. Immediately. The corridors were too bright on the way down. The lighting system had been glitching for weeks, flickering, whole sections going dark for hours. Now every panel was lit at full intensity. No shadows anywhere. It hurt to look at. I passed Jenkins from cargo processing standing in a doorway, staring at his hands. I said his name twice. He didn't look up. Just kept turning his palms over, back and forth, like he was seeing them for the first time. Deck 12 was the largest open space on the ship. I'd been there dozens of times for briefings, crew gatherings, the occasional movie night. But walking in felt like stepping into a room I'd only seen in photographs. Everything was in the right place. The chairs. The podium. The observation windows showing nothing but black. But it all felt staged. Arranged. Like a museum recreation of what Deck 12 was supposed to be. 60 people were already there. Maybe 70. Not enough. We had 900 crew. I looked for faces I knew. Ramirez from communications. Chen, one of the junior engineers. Okoye from medical. They weren't talking to each other. Just standing there, scattered around the room in a pattern that looked random until I realized they were all equidistant from each other. Perfectly spaced. Like someone had arranged them. I started toward Ramirez, and she turned to look at me. Her expression didn't change. She just tracked me with her eyes, and I stopped walking. Something in the way she looked at me made my throat close. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even unfriendly. It was observational. Clinical. The way you'd watch an insect trying to find its way out of a jar. Yates appeared on the podium. I didn't see him walk up. He was just there, hands at his sides, looking out at us. He'd lost weight. His uniform hung off him, and his skin had this waxy quality, like something preserved. When he spoke, his lips moved slightly out of sync with the words. We've experienced a navigational error. The Atropos is no longer on our projected course. We are currently attempting to re-establish our position and restore primary systems. All personnel are to remain in designated areas until further notice. Do not attempt to access restricted sections. Do not operate communications equipment. Do not leave your assigned deck without authorization. Someone behind me asked where we were. I turned to look, but everyone was facing forward. Yates didn't answer. He just repeated the instructions, word for word, same inflection, like he was reading from a script he'd already read. Then he stepped down and walked toward the far exit. His gait was too smooth. Like he was on a track. That's when I noticed the windows. The observation panels that should have shown open space. They were black, but not the black of distance. Too uniform. Too complete. No stars. No distant nebula glow. No light scatter from the Atropos herself. Just black. And in that black, very faintly, I could see movement. Shapes that might have been reflections, except we were all standing still. The room began to empty. People filing out in that same spaced pattern, not talking, not looking at each other. I tried to follow Ramirez, but she was already gone. I turned back and the room was empty. Just me and the chairs and that perfect, terrible light. I went back to my quarters. Or tried to. The corridors kept shifting. Not visibly. But I'd walk down a passage I'd walked 1,000 times and it would take longer. Or shorter. Or I'd end up somewhere I wasn't trying to go. I passed the same junction 4 times before I realized the directional markers were moving. Just slightly. A few degrees each time I looked away. By the time I found my door, I'd been walking for an hour, and my legs didn't hurt. My quarters looked right. Bed. Desk. Locker. Porthole window showing that same impenetrable black. But someone had been inside. I knew because of the book. A physical book, actual paper, that my brother gave me before I shipped out. I'd left it on my desk, open to page 47. Now it was on page 93. And the margins were filled with handwriting. My handwriting. Notes I didn't remember making. Observations about crew behavior. Time discrepancies. A sketch of the ship that showed decks that didn't exist. I sat on the bed and tried to think. Tried to remember when things started feeling wrong. But the timeline wouldn't hold still in my head. I remembered the departure. Earth orbit. The long burn toward deep space. The first month. The second. After that, everything got blurry. Events out of order. Conversations I couldn't place. I'd been keeping a log. Personal entries, just audio notes. I pulled them up on my tablet. The first 70 entries were normal. Routine observations. Complaints about the food. A message to my brother I never sent. Then they changed. Entry 71, saw myself in the maintenance corridor today. Not a reflection. Me. Wearing the uniform I wore yesterday. We looked at each other and neither of us ran. Entry 84, the ship is bigger than it should be. Check the deck plans. They don't match the manifest. Too many corridors. Too many rooms. When I try to count them, I lose track. Entry 90, we passed Earth 3 days ago. Saw it through the observation deck. But we're supposed to be 6 months out. Either we turned around, or that wasn't Earth. I didn't remember recording any of those entries. I tried to access the ship's main logs. Locked. Crew manifest. Locked. Navigation data. Locked. But the internal sensors were still active, and I pulled up the population tracker. 900 crew members. Little blue dots scattered across the deck displays. I watched for 10 minutes. Not one of them moved. Not a single pixel. I cross-referenced with the habitation assignments. 200 crew members were showing active in sections that had been sealed off for maintenance before we launched. 50 more in the cargo bays. 20 in a section labeled Observatory Annex, which didn't exist on any schematic I could find. I needed to talk to someone. Someone who would remember things the way I did. Wei, the astrocartographer in the quarters next to mine. We'd played chess a few times. She was sharp. Skeptical. Not the kind of person who'd accept something wrong without questioning it. Her door was open. The room beyond was dark except for the glow of her monitor. She was sitting at her desk, backlit. I knocked. She didn't turn around. "Wei. Come in," she said. But her mouth didn't move. I stayed in the doorway. On her screen was a star chart, but it was wrong. The constellations were inverted. Inside out. She was tracing lines between them with her finger, connecting points that formed shapes I almost recognized. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Do you see it?" she asked without turning. "The shape we're making?" "What are you talking about?" "We're not moving through space. We're being moved. Arranged. Every trajectory correction, every course adjustment. We think we're navigating, but we're just following the path. The shape isn't done yet. Wei, we need to get to the bridge. Something's wrong with. The bridge is empty. It's been empty for months. We've been running on automation. Except it's not automation. It's something else. It's learning us. Figuring out how we work. How we think. It needed time. It needed us to stay calm. Stay predictable. I backed out of the room. She didn't try to stop me. Just kept tracing those patterns, whispering numbers I couldn't parse. The bridge. I had to get to the bridge. Confirm what she said wasn't true. But I didn't know the way anymore. The Atropos was too big now. Too empty. I passed sections I'd never seen. Corridors that curved wrong. Rooms full of equipment I didn't recognize, all of it humming with that same frequency the ship used to make. Except now it wasn't coming from the engines. It was coming from the walls. A resonance. A pulse. Like a heartbeat. I found a lift and took it up. Or down. The indicators weren't working. When the doors opened, I was on the bridge. Exactly as Wei said. Empty. Every station unmanned. But the systems were active. Screens showing data streams. Course projections. Engine status. All normal. All optimal. The captain's chair was facing away from me, toward the main view screen. The view screen showed space. Real space. Stars. Nebulae. The distant glow of the Kepler Belt. We were exactly where we were supposed to be. On schedule. On course. But I knew it was a lie. I don't know how. I just did. I walked toward the captain's chair and stopped. Someone was sitting in it. I could see the edge of a shoulder. The armrest. I didn't want to look. Didn't want to see who it was. But I walked around anyway. It was me. Older. Maybe 10 years. Wearing a captain's uniform. Eyes open. Staring at the view screen. Not breathing. Not blinking. Just sitting there, perfectly still, like a wax figure. I reached out to touch it, and my hand passed through. Not like a hologram. Like it wasn't entirely there. Like it existed in some space adjacent to the one I was standing in. I pulled my hand back, and the figure turned its head. Looked right at me. And smiled. "You're early," it said. I ran. Don't remember leaving the bridge. Don't remember the corridors. I just ran until I was back in deck 12, gasping, hands on my knees, trying to pull air into lungs that didn't feel like mine anymore. The room was full again. All 900 crew. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly still. All of them watching me. And I realized I was standing in the center. The exact geometric center of the pattern they formed. They didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. And then I understood. The Atropos wasn't a ship anymore. It was a container. A collection point. We weren't traveling. We were being studied. Every action logged. Every thought measured. Every version of ourselves catalogued and filed away. The ship had stopped screaming because it didn't need to anymore. It had all the data it required. We were done. Complete. And now it was just a matter of waiting to see what would be done with us. I looked at the faces around me. Ramirez. Chen. Okoye. Jenkins. Wei. Yates. All of them watching with that same clinical expression. That same patient observation. And I realized they weren't my crew anymore. They were copies. Echoes. The originals had been replaced so gradually, so carefully, that none of us had noticed. And now I was the last one. The last data point. The final piece of the pattern. The lights dimmed. Not to darkness. To something else. A space between frequencies. And in that space, I saw what was outside the ship. Not the black. Not the void. But something vast. Something that had been watching us since we left Earth. Since before we left Earth. A presence so large we'd mistaken it for space itself. And it had been so patient. So careful. Letting us believe we were still ourselves. Still human. Still real. I looked down at my hands. Turned them over, back and forth, just like Jenkins had. And I didn't recognize them. Couldn't remember if they'd always looked like this. Couldn't remember if I'd always been here. Standing in this room. In this pattern. Waiting to be catalogued. The ship began to hum again. But it wasn't the Atropos. It was something older. Something that had been pretending to be the Atropos. And now that the pretending was done, it could finally speak in its own voice. And it said my name. Not the name I remembered. The one I actually had. The one I'd forgotten. The one I'd been given when I was collected. And I answered,